Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Fact or Fallacy. Today we'll be talking about argument by analogy, and we're going to begin by asking if a statement is valid, and you get to decide, is this fact or is it fallacy? The universe is a complex system, like a watch. We wouldn't think that a watch can come about by accident. Something so complicated must have been created by someone. The universe is a lot more complicated, so it must have been created by a being who is a lot more intelligent. So is this statement valid? Why or why not? I'll give you a moment to think. The answer is coming up. Bing. Argument by analogy. So an analogy is when we say that two distinct or pretty different things are alike in some way. We're not talking about like this chair is similar to that chair, because those are too similar. In the case of the universe versus a watch, those are pretty different things, but we found that they're similar in that they are both complex. We then use that comparison to say that if they're alike in that way, they must also be alike in another way. So specifically, since the watch is complex and was created by an intelligent being, the universe, which is also complex, must have been created by an intelligent being. You know, this does sound reasonable, but let's apply the same logic backwards. Can you think of a few ways in which the universe and the watch are different? I'll give you a moment to think. The answer is coming up. I thought of two differences right off the bat. You might have thought of others. One, the universe is incomprehensibly large, while the watch is small. The universe is full of stars, planets, and empty space, while a watch is not. So are there other differences? Anyway, if we can find a lot of differences, it kind of makes those similarities seem less convincing for our argument. So let's look at this statement. So this book I'm reading is supposed to have a similar plot to the other one we've already read. So since I didn't like the other book, I probably won't like this one. It's probably very boring. Now this seems reasonable, but can you think of some differences between the books that might be there that aren't in this statement? I mean, I can think perhaps, different authors have different styles of writing. And even though there's a similar plot, one author could write it in a completely different way. That might make it interesting. So, however, we do find that sometimes argument by analogy does work, doesn't it? I mean, look at this one. This seems pretty reasonable to me. There are two Italian restaurants. They both serve the same types of food. I have been to one, and it was very good. I know both of them use the same olive oil in cooking, and they buy food supplies from the same place. They each have a lot of customers, and both of them have chefs who learned to cook in the same place. I, therefore, think the second restaurant will have excellent food, too. So what's the difference between this statement and the previous statements, the one about the book and the one about the universe and the watch? How is this one different that makes it more convincing? Well, first of all, in the previous statements, there was only one analogy, right? The watch and the universe only were complex, and the books only had the same plot. But we have more analogies for these restaurants, a number of analogies. So that's the aspect of number in argument by analogy that could give it more reasonable belief. And the analogies used can also be checked for truth or falsehood. This is the aspect of truth. So we can check to see if the restaurants use the same olive oil, if the chefs learned in the same place, if they buy from the same food manufacturer or producer or deliverer. Right? If we look at the relevance of the argument, the types of ingredients used and the popularity of the restaurants are very good indicators of whether the food is good. I mean, if a lot of people like them and they use the same ingredients, then they're probably both very good. That's relevant. The fourth aspect would be diversity in argument by analogy. So the things that are similar between the restaurants are very similar. The same olive oil, the same ingredients. Chefs are more similar. than a vague term in the case of the universe versus the watch, like complex. So the diversity here, or the similarity between the two items you're comparing, what you're showing is similar is very similar versus very diverse. However, there is a fifth aspect of argument by analogy. It's called disanalogy. And we've talked about it already. This reminds us that no matter how strong analogies are, we should always check how the two items can be different. I mean, what would you think if you found out that the second chef likes to overuse and test with various spices in cooking, while the first chef only uses a little salt and pepper? Or, differently said, the first chef always uses the same ingredients, always makes the food the same, and the second chef tests and changes the recipe every day. Would you feel a little less confident about the quality of the second restaurant if you found that was a difference? And that's something that we haven't looked at in this argument. So even with a lot of things going for you, you do need to double check arguments by analogy. And that's why they're logical fallacies. So how can we use this fallacy in our own writing, in our own arguments? Often it's used in legal discussions, but what matters is how valid all of those five aspects of the argument by analogy are. Is it true? Are the similarities relevant to the argument? Are there a lot of similarities? Are the similarities very, very similar or something that's very different? And are there things that aren't being mentioned that would show that these two things are very different, or disanalogy? It also helps to have other arguments for your statement that are not argument by analogy, like my best friend and 15 other people were all polled and found out that we found out that they all said that both restaurants were equally good. That would be another argument that you could use. A poll or articles from food critics would be another way to add to your argument. Now, the second thing we need to do with arguments or logical fallacies is defend against misinformation. So I'll let you think again. How could you defend yourself against other people fooling you with the argument by analogy? And here comes the answer. So you just do the same thing that you'd be doing with your own work. You check that all five aspects are convincing. Right? Weigh that is every statement of similarity true? Are they relevant? Are there lots of statements of similarity or just a few? And are they really comparable and similar things, like the olive oil versus complexity? And are there any ways we can disprove this analogy with disanalogy? So now your assignment, again, if you're not in my class, this isn't an assignment, but you're welcome to do this. You won't be able to find the assignment argument by analogy on Canvas, but you can still answer the two questions. For my students, go to Canvas. Argument by analogy should be due this Friday, so that's how you can find it. And the question one asks you, like we did yesterday with circular reasoning, to create a simple argument by analogy. You can make it up, or you can use a real argument you've heard. Question two asks you how you might make the argument by analogy stronger. So don't change the argument. Just say how you would like the argument better. How you would make the argument better. Sorry, start with the following sentence starter. I would make this argument better by... And I think I've already given you a few examples back here. The five aspects of the argument, and have other arguments. So be specific about how you would make this argument better. That is your assignment, and I hope you, if you didn't enjoy this video, at least hopefully you understand it. I look forward to our next video in the series.